Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for this webinar with Margot Note. My name is Bradley, and I will be your moderator for this webinar titled Championing Exceptional Archival Services. Before we start, I would like to provide some information about our company and introduce today's presenter. Lucidea is a software developing company specialized in museum and archival collections management solutions, as well as knowledge management and library automation systems. Our brands include Sydney, Presto, Argus, Archivera, Eloquent, and Quadrastar. Now, I would like to take a moment to introduce today's presenter, Margot Note. Margot Note is an author, archivist, and records manager helping individuals and organizations harness their history. As the principal of Margot Note Consulting LLC, she facilitates the understanding of the importance of unique collections, suggesting ways to manage them and use them to tell stories to connect with people. She is also a popular guest author for Lucidea's Think Clearly blog and has provided us with many great webinars that are listed on our website, so please feel free to check those out after today's session. Take it away, Margot.
Thank you. So today I'm going to be talking about customer service in the realm of archival services. And so the principles of customer service are having external interactions. So kind of beyond your archives department, how does the repository interact with the public? I think equally important, depending on what kind of organization you work in, is also looking at an internal engagement and thinking about those internal stakeholders and colleagues that can really kind of harness the power of your archival holdings. And it really fosters a knowledge sharing culture. When I was preparing this slide deck, I was thinking about a current client that I'm having, a charitable trust that is looking to get someone kind of a librarian, kind of an archivist, kind of a knowledge manager, kind of an information governance professional. They're kind of how they're naming this position, I think, is different, and they'll figure it out in time. But I think it was important in having these conversations with that client is really thinking about what do we mean by knowledge and sharing the knowledge within an organization. Obviously, as an organization progresses and has different programs and has different services, there's all this wisdom and knowledge that's created. And so someone that's, let's say, working in an archives department can really help give kind of guidance to how you're capturing that knowledge. So then there's easier onboarding and offboarding, and that you're kind of retaining the knowledge and the wisdom that you create in your everyday activities. And most people, what I realize is that, they're just doing their jobs. They're not really thinking about the sustainability of the knowledge that they're creating. And obviously someone that's an archivist is really having that kind of big picture, bird's eye view of an organization and really capturing that knowledge. So part of that is having a user-centric approach. So we're in a very unique position where we have, we know the work that we're doing, but we also have to think about how can we talk to in a language that the user will understand, that they'll feel comfortable using these materials, that they feel comfortable asking questions about these materials. So it's really about providing exceptional service. So thinking about and I'm guilty of this too, where, you get into the collection and it's like totally fascinating. You kind of forget about the people that you're serving. Obviously, a beautiful archives collection, you want it to be usable. It's not this pristine thing. It exists to be used. And so sometimes I even find myself having to remind myself that, yes, this is for use. So we really want to empower our colleagues to use the collections and think about finding solutions and insights to their everyday problems. So what are they doing that they could do it faster, easier, have it more fun to use the archival collections? And that's what our role is, kind of providing customer service with a user-centric approach. There's obviously kind of very basic helpful practices. None of these, I imagine, are a surprise, responding to queries quickly and friendly, and trying to provide access to materials in ways that you can, in ways that people want to get that access. And then offering guidance too, because maybe a colleague is asking about a particular collection or a particular subject. They might not be aware of a whole different realm of materials that would be maybe equally or even more helpful to them. So it's really kind of having that reference interview with them and seeing what they want and giving them what they want, but also suggesting other approaches as well. And so I think the key part of good customer service is really streamlining your processes because, and I feel like I say this in every webinar, archivists are understaffed, under-resourced, underfunded. We're asked to do a lot. We wear many different hats, and we want to make sure that whatever work we're doing like makes sense. So in this webinar and the blog post and the book that this information will be in, I adapted something from the Harvard Business Review and made it into the Stop, Alter, Continue, Start assessment. So basically, that's taking a look at all the tasks that you do, all the kind of activities that are kind of under your realm, the processes that fuel the archives department, listing them, brainstorming, brain dumping what they are, and then looking through and making some choices about what we want to continue, what we want to stop, what we want to start. So the ultimate goal is to eliminate non-essential tasks and optimize workflows. So the work that we're doing adds a lot of benefit and it's not wasting time. I had a client about a year ago. I was working with them kind of on a project that was kind of a needs assessment, but kind of more than that. But they were a really interesting case study because they were a local history room inside a county library. And the person who founded this local history room had some library background, no archival background, and was very passionate. I mean, it was passion over professionalism is how I kind of phrased it. She was collecting lots of materials. She was really involved in the community. It was really about getting the resources in this local history room, and kudos to her. I'm in no way being negative about the work that she did. But then when she eventually retired, another person took on this role. And so she was really thinking about there is a lot going on here. And this role was kind of, several people had this role, and the feedback that we were getting was that people get burnt out at this role because there was too much stuff going on, too much things that they were responsible for. And so part of my assessment working with the team is doing this assessment, the Stop, Alter, Continue, Start. So looking at all the things that they were doing that they kind of inherited from this position and really thinking about, do we really want to continue doing these things? And a lot of them were unnecessary. And then there was stuff that they had to do. So it was a really interesting kind of case study to see kind of that transition of power and authority within that position and seeing, okay, this is the new guard. What are we doing now that's different than what happened in the past? And the ultimate goal was not only to make things efficient and optimize workflows and all those nice words, but it was actually to help the people that were working in this department not be so burnt out. So their focus is really working on the stuff that had to be done that actually had a benefit and feeling confident that they could let go of the stuff that did not serve them, did not serve their users. And ultimately, I think we wound up in a really good place where the department was sustainable, they weren't feeling burnt out, and ultimately they were using much better archival best practices. So let's kind of talk a little bit about that assessment, and I'll go through each one. So there's stop, there's alter, there's continue, and start. So looking at all the processes that the archives does and thinking about kind of how we can kind of place them into these 4 different quadrants. So stop is obviously pretty obvious. We want to think about tasks that were once important but are now low priority. Things that, let's say, a predecessor did, or maybe before we had better technology or a better software system, or we digitize things, or we served a different type of leadership or decision makers. So we want to make sure what are the tasks that we can remove without adverse effects. So if we stop doing it, no one would really notice and there'd be no real blowback from it. And the kind of the good thing about a lot of our archival activities is a lot of people outside of that department don't really know what we do and don't really understand that we do. So sometimes we're only doing things because we feel like we have to, and we can give up these tasks that no longer serve us or our users. We can also think about what are tasks that we can give to others with minimal effort. So what are things, let's say if you're a director of an archives, what can you give to your interns, your volunteers, your other members of the department? What can you do maybe even instead of doing it, let's say weekly or monthly, what can we do maybe quarterly? So really thinking about using whatever position that you're in, you're making sure that you're doing kind of every position wants to work to its maximum capability, and then really not worry about the stuff that doesn't matter, and kind of having the freedom in this assessment to say these are the things that don't matter and I'm not going to do it anymore. And I think especially as a department, if you decide to do this, take a step back and see we're not doing this anymore. I think there's a lot of freedom in that. I think people feel like they have to do it because it was done in the past or colleagues will expect it. But I think if everyone's in agreement, you can say we're not doing this anymore. And that I think is one of the most powerful things of this assessment, is to really let go of things, that processes that just don't make any sense anymore. The next option is alter. And it's really thinking about modifying practices and aligning with evolving needs. So what is a process or a task that you currently do that maybe you don't have to do it at such a high level? Maybe you can do it at more of a minimum level. How can we change it? How can we minimize the steps? How can we make it more efficient? In project management, there's a great term called gold plating, which means you do the task, but you do kind of extra work to make it better, but it doesn't really make it that much better. It just uses up a lot of time. So I think when you're looking at processes, you can start to, when you're thinking about things to alter, what are steps that you can remove or are not necessary? Sometimes with processing, that's a big part of it. And, do you have to remove every staple? Do you have to rehouse everything? Do you have to refolder? Do you have to process things at the folder level? Maybe the box level might work. And I'll talk a little bit more about this as this webinar continues. So there are some tasks that are perfect as they are. You just continue them. So you maintain the practices. They're basically fundamental, and they're typically valued by stakeholders. Stakeholders might not even realize that you're doing it, but they appreciate what the end point or what the end result is. So these are the types of processes and tasks that everyone agrees, this works how it is. It's not broken. Let's continue doing it. And that's very helpful to say, we're on track to doing what we should be doing with these tasks. And then there's also start. So what should you be doing that maybe you hadn't done before? And maybe you couldn't do it before because you had so many tasks that you decided that were going to be stopped or altered in some way. So you can initiate actions, and it's about continuous improvement. So thinking about, now that maybe we have a little bit more time and a little bit more intellectual brain power left to us, what are activities that make sense that we should start doing? And I think it's very helpful to do this assessment, maybe every 6 months or every year. I find in my own consulting practice, I use the time period between kind of Thanksgiving and Christmas, or Christmas and the New Year's, where things are a little bit less hectic, to kind of take a step back and really think about, do I want to continue doing these things? What are things that I can let go of, and what can I start again? And I think it's just really helpful to give yourself some of that time to think rather than do. And I think that's one way of improving customer service, is to really not be such a doer, but thinking more strategically and politically, to be frank. So obviously, one way of doing customer service that I think is kind of well known, that's super helpful within the archival profession, is efficient processing through more product, less process, MPLP. I remember when I first heard about this years and years ago, it was like, yes, they understand they understand what's going on. So basically, it's thinking about reducing your backlogs and prioritizing user needs by doing less processing. So thinking about kind of the minimal viable processing that you can do to a collection to get them to the users, knowing that you can always go back, you can always process more, but not being such a stickler to having things to be perfect, and being frankly a little bit okay with things being a little bit messy, and trusting that your users can figure things out. So nothing has to be completely perfect, but knowing that the users with a very specific research need can do some of that labor of finding things within a folder, for example. It doesn't have to be 100% perfect and pristine. And in an ideal world, it would be, but just knowing the volume of materials that you have, it's very unlikely, especially if you have a lot of backlogs. So it's kind of, I wish they kind of called it the Goldilocks processing. It's just enough processing. It's not too much, it's not too little. It's really finding the balance between quality and quantity. And you're looking at minimal processing standards. What do we agree that we're going to do when we're processing, and what do we agree that we're not going to do? Like, for example, if you have a climate controlled storage area, does it really make sense to refolder materials, rebox materials, to remove all staples, all uh, or things that might potentially rust if you're in an environment that it's not really going to rust. Like thinking about that, like thinking about what can you do to get the materials out there without being so, frankly, pretty fussy. And it is very freeing to think in that way. And there's also, I think, once you do the MPLP, you can start thinking about customizing strategies. So this is where I think extensible processing comes into play. And that's looking at collection size, complexity, and user expectations, and thinking about some collections are just worth processing at a higher level than other levels. So extensible processing, it's very hard to say, comes from the book by Daniel A. Santamaria by ALA. It's called Extensible Processing for Archives and Special Collections, Reducing Processing Backlogs. I think this is a brilliant book. It's one of my favorite archival books. And it really is saying, like, not everything has to be done at some high level. You can have materials organized at a baseline level and then spend your time with parts of the collection going to much greater detail. So it's agile processing. It really prioritizes the access over perfection. It adapts to changing needs, and there's adjustments based on new information. So an example I can give is working with a collection in the past that was kind of program related materials related to, I'm going to be very vague, related to something. And so I knew that, let's say, for example, the financial records of this organization, I didn't have to go into much detail. I could just say within a box, financial records from 1965 to 1970, and that was good enough. If people wanted to take a look at it, they knew what was in there. They would find their audits and other forms and other reporting details that would be within this box. I didn't have to go in such great detail, folder level or item level. But when I was working with the program files, I got into much more detail because I knew people were looking for specific projects and specific project phases within certain years. So I would have, I would go at the folder level and look at things like project, the project phase related to some type of grant phase, and then the years. And so that I was able to provide information. I knew that the users looking for this information wanted to get more granular in those project files, but I also knew that if they wanted to look at the financial files, they could just look through the box. That's where you start to make that, and you'll know as an archivist what makes sense, what your users are looking for, and what level is a right size level to process things at. And I think that's the key of customer service, is really using your time wisely and realizing that there's different levels of description that you need for these collections. So some of the principles of this type of processing, there's 6 in total, and we'll go through them. So one is creating a baseline level of access for materials. So just thinking about every, let's say every part of this collection has at least box level description. And then creating a standardized structured description. So knowing that there's certain, it's very uniform in how you're describing things. And you're thinking about materials in the aggregate. So we're not getting into the item level. Sometimes we're not even getting into the folder level. We're just thinking about groups and chunks. That's how we can manage these massive collections, is to think about chunking in groups. We want to do no harm. We want to limit the handling. So knowing that, okay, we know what this collection is, it's organized, it's preserved, but we want to minimally handle it. You kind of think about that baseline processing, and then think about what requires further processing. So again, thinking about, do we want things processed at the box level? What can we do at the folder level? Maybe there's some very valuable, important materials that you would do at an item level. Not everything kind of meets that level. And approaching the processing holistically. So really thinking about things as a group. So an example I can give, other than the one I gave a few slides back, was I'm working with a private client right now to go through her husband's materials, and he was a editor of pretty significant literary figures. And the collection is, a homegrown collection, things that he collected. And he was a collector, he wasn't an organizer. So I'm looking at boxes of materials and thinking about how to create an inventory. And part of it is thinking about a baseline inventory. So I'm going box, there's things that are boxes and things that are in drawers. So, I'm obviously organizing things by boxes and getting a sense of what this collection looks like. And then there's going to be pieces of the collection, and I'm going to go into much more detail. So, there's some great advanced reader copies of some significant works. Those are things that are eventually probably going to be sold. So I want to collect it, at that item level that I'm writing down each box and I'm inventorying. There's also parts of the collection that are just kind of secondary photocopies of materials, and that maybe takes up half a box. So I'm just saying, 4 linear feet of photocopy of secondary sources. I don't have to go into the details. If someone wants to take a look at it, they can. But again, I'm thinking about what makes sense for my user. There's a great amount of underground comics that this person was a collector of. So when I inventory those comics, because ultimately they're going to be sold to either auctioned off or bought by a bookseller, I'm going to be going into the details of, the title, the author, the year, and then condition level. So is it near fine condition? Is it poor condition, good condition? Because that's what the user is going to be looking at. I wouldn't just say underground comics box 1, because that's not really helpful to anyone. So again, really making that decision making, and using rather than doing the labor of having everything at the same level, using your intellect to figure out what requires what level of description. So we also want to think about kind of archival efficiency, thinking about implementing systems, quick information retrieval, and user-friendly interfaces. So it really depends on kind of the software and what's available to you. I know in past positions I had a link, like it was very not, I didn't really have much software. I had an aging access database. I had spreadsheets. I had an internet that I could just put a few links. I mean, that's how I try to make it as beautiful as possible, given the resources that I have. I know, for example, I was working with a client to procure a digital asset management system. And so for them, we were looking at things, what could be automated, and really thinking about what are the user-friendly interfaces that we can use to give to the users, the stakeholders. And so that was much more efficient. But kind of what I'm trying to say here is that not everyone has this great, powerful software or has a ton of staff to do things or has the time to do things, but it's kind of given you the resources that you have, what can you make things easy for the users to access the information, and what can you do to make it efficient, given kind of the cards that you're given to hold. So I think the main thing I want to emphasize is self-service. Now, a lot of internal users need a little bit of hand-holding and kind of white glove service, see white gloves here, that need, let's say, if your president or CEO or their assistant wants something, it's not like you're just going to say, oh yeah, look in the database, bye-bye. You're going to provide that one-on-one service. But a lot of people, a lot of your colleagues want to be able to look at things and find things on their own because they know what they're looking for. For example, if they're looking with images, for example, that's really tricky because everyone has different types of visual literacy. The images are not only what you're seeing, but kind of the vibe that they're giving, the color scheme, what they're showing. So it's very individual. So in that case, you want to be able to provide people with some type of self-service to look at the materials on their own without that archival intervention. You also have to think about, we are working in, for some of us, we're working in workspaces that might be remote. Not everyone's in the office. Not everyone, let's say, is in the same town. Maybe they're across the country. Maybe they're across the world. Maybe they're working very late they have a deadline and they don't want to be looking at things in the office from 9 to 5. So we do want to provide that self-service when we can. So that could be putting things, like as I said, on the internet, having things organized on a server or a share file of some sort, having a database that people can have access to. It really depends on kind of the resources that you have, but we're looking at ensuring quality, authenticity, and preservation when we're providing the ability to do self-service for archival materials. I think a big part of customer service with archives is establishing trust. Again, as archivists, we're doing a particular type of service that most people don't understand. They don't really understand the work that we do. Maybe they don't appreciate it. Maybe they don't understand how much it involves with technology and knowledge. I think we're always kind of misunderstood. And so one way to establish trust is reference interviews. So the classic reference interview that if you went to library school, you were taught how to do them, one would hope. And so we're really thinking about tailoring your services to what people need, their familiarity with technology, with the organization. Maybe they've been at the organization for a very long time and they might even know more about the collection than you do. Maybe they're a new hire and are kind of getting their feet under the desk and they need a little bit more assistance. You're really looking at learning styles of people, like how they best process information or how they want to receive information, and then the expertise levels. So I want to walk through some of reference interviews just to refresh everyone about how important they are, especially when you're providing customer service for archives. So obviously they enhance the profession's image. They're a way that you can talk to users in a way maybe you haven't been able to before to kind of talk about the work that you do, show that you're helping them do their work more efficiently, make it be done easily as well. It really shows the value of archival resources because people might be familiar with maybe one collection or some of what you do. And it's really nice to show them all of what you do. And also if they have a particular request that they might think that only this collection serves, you might know a whole bunch of other materials that would be just as helpful, that would energize them and excite them. And we really want to encourage repeat visits and referrals. So we want to make our internal users happy so they can talk to other people, that they know that there's a resource here that they can tap into within the organization. So a big part of this is being approachable. So having a visible presence. So that could be either in person or remotely. So making sure that there's some type of signage for in-person or remote help on the website, on your intranet, in person. You want to be ready to assist, and you also want to stop other activities so you're really listening. I remember I was thinking about this so in one position I had, there were several different moves. So in the first, when I was first there, I had an office that had a lot of the archival materials, and there was glass and the doorway. So when people entered the room, I'd be able to greet them and help them right away. We had a few different moves, and in one of the moves, I was kind of at the end of the hallway, in kind of a more kind of open, kind of an open office, which is like the worst. Like I'd rather work in a cubicle because at least you have some privacy. It was this weird open office configuration where no one had any privacy, and it was really loud, and you'd have to wear headphones to get your work done. And so my back was to people. So that is like terrible feng shui. It's a terrible way to greet people. They could see my screen, and I eventually like had a screen blocker so they couldn't see what I was working on, because sometimes I was working on very sensitive materials. And it would be like they would be asking for help, but it would be like they would be scaring me almost. And that was just a terrible way to be approachable to help people. So eventually what I figured out is I put almost like I taped a little mirror to my monitor so I could look behind me so I could actually see people approaching me, kind of like a mirror in your car, like a rear view mirror. And that way, as people approached, I could turn around and greet them. Ultimately, I wound up moving to another place in the office where I could see people as they approached me. But it was such a it really did not help my position that it felt like people were imposing when they asked for help. I wanted to be much more open. So I really tried to make do with what I was given. And I have to say, depending on where your department is located, sometimes the archives is like, down a hallway and a basement somewhere, kind of off the beaten path. So if there's any way that you can make it approachable, that people can see you either in person or online or in some way to make yourself visible, really explore what that might look like, to have that be your kind of welcoming presence. You're welcoming to the archives. You want to help them. You want them to feel like they can come to you. You obviously want to demonstrate interest in what they're talking about. You want to confirm understanding, and that can be done with verbal or nonverbal cues. I think it's helpful to have reference interviews either kind of physically, like in person, or ideally maybe do it through something like Zoom or Teams, where you can read people's body language and they can read your body language. I think sometimes on the phone, sometimes that's difficult to do. And sometimes with email, sometimes it's hard to figure out the tone. But it is very helpful to be able to read people's bodies, because they might be saying something and then they might be really closed off. Or you might be saying that something that you think is very welcoming, and then you might, be crossing your arms or, looking very sternly, where you're giving off a different vibe than how you feel. So really thinking about what does that kind of nonverbal communication look like, and then saying yes, tell me more, like really asking for that information, and you want to acknowledge requests promptly. I found it so what I find that I do, that I kind of a habit that I have that I imagine maybe is really common, is that when people are telling me what they're looking for, or they have a certain they're bringing me a problem they want me to solve, I immediately go into problem solving mode. It's almost like I have to tell myself I have to just I have to tell myself, okay, and this is what I do, like with my consulting. I usually have an introductory call or Zoom where I'm just telling myself I'm in information gathering mode. I'm not solving any problems. I'm just being really open and curious about what people are saying. And then eventually I can sit on what they said and then provide solutions, let's say in the next call or when we're talking about a proposal for work. But really, that's where I would say really think about how can you be curious and ask questions and understand what they're asking and sometimes even what they're not asking. So not thinking about solving the problem right away. I found that I'm in information gathering mode and I'll say, okay, let me think about this a little bit. So I'll get back to you in 20 minutes, or I'll get back to you end of day, or I'll get back to you next week. Giving myself the time to synthesize and think. And, I'm someone that can't really think on my feet, or I need time. Without pressure to find a solution. And I find when I give myself that time to think about it, not immediately go into problem solving mode, I can find a better solution. But I have to be patient with myself, and also the user has to be a little bit of patient with me. And I find that most people don't, if they have a problem, they don't expect an immediate answer. All they want to know is when will you get back to them at a certain time. And once you say that, you have to be committed to answering them in 20 minutes or at end of day or the next day or next week. And that's how I find it really helpful. And that kind of builds trust where you're saying, I don't really know the answer. I need to think about it and I will get back to you. And then you do get back to them. So they know to expect and trust you. So you want to communicate effectively. You want to allow users to express their needs fully. So not really stopping them or correcting them. Again, being very curious about what they're asking for and what exactly they need these materials. Sometimes I found that I try to have them focus on the problem, and sometimes they're trying to offer a solution. Like they think this is like something is a solution, which might not be true. I more ask, okay, what is the problem that you're trying to solve, and really getting to the details of that, and let me help you figure out how to solve that problem. Put that on my shoulders to figure out. It's important to avoid jargon. I find I do this all the time where I'm like in archives mode and have to realize, okay, most people don't understand like what I'm talking about. I remember I was working maybe a couple months ago, I was working on a collection development policy with an archives team, and they were fantastic. And they wanted something in the beginning of this collection development policy that talked about kind of what are archives, like archives at a level that undergraduates would understand. And I had some paragraph about evidential and like the value, like archival values, and it was not right. It was a too theoretical. It was more like archives are like the most basic description of what archives are, like primary sources. Well, what do we mean by primary sources? So again, I think sometimes that's a difficult dance of thinking you're being really obvious about what archives are, but really being in the shoes of someone else that's not an archivist and talking, trying to communicate to them with language that they understand, that is not jargony or too complicated or overly theoretical, as sometimes archivists like to be. You want to use open-ended questions, not yes or no, but really kind of pulling the information out of them, and then maintaining objectivity. So really being neutral about what they're asking for. I find sometimes when I always just tell myself, be curious about what people are talking about, and then I can kind of synthesize it on my own. And I find that to be very helpful. You want to search efficiently, so thinking about the strategy, sources, and usage that the users can use. You want to strive to meet the time constraints. So knowing, okay, they need this by this deadline, they need this by tomorrow, or they need this by next week, and being very providing as much as you can within that time frame, because obviously it has to be timely. Want to refine the topic scope. So maybe someone is talking about something and it's not quite right, and you can kind of refine it. So make it smaller, make it broader, make it slightly different. And then recognize when to refer to other resources. So there might be resources within the archives. Maybe there's some secondary sources that you always refer to that are outside of the organization. Maybe there's someone else within the organization they should be speaking to. Like just being really mindful of helping them efficiently, like find what they're looking for. And then of course you want to follow up. So you inquire if the questions have been answered. You want to encourage users to return for further assistance. So it's like, if, why don't you work with these materials and get back to me if you need me to help you more, if you have further questions. You can do ongoing research when necessary. Let's say maybe it's a big project, maybe it's a publication that they need, or let's say an anniversary or a milestone that this is a longer type project that you should be checking in with them. And then you want to avoid ending prematurely. So making sure they're satisfied, that they feel like, they're not bothering you by asking these questions, that they're really feeling satisfied that they got what they wanted out of the archives. So you can also train colleagues. So you can offer tutorials on search techniques. You can explain the significance of records. You can address the varying levels of familiarity. And then thinking about cross-disciplinary connections. So maybe there's, finance and marketing, or programs and administration, or any type of, the different departments can maybe be working on similar projects that might be helpful. I had a client that I was working with, primarily their HR person. This is a big construction company. I was working with kind of their head of HR for materials, for kind of creating a corporate history that ultimately landed in the kind of marketing and communications department. But then I think it went back to another person in HR because they were going to do an anniversary. And, HR and the marketing department weren't really talking to each other about the materials or like the work that I did. So I was able to kind of do a triage between the three of them to help them talk to each other and know what they were looking for. And they just didn't realize, I was the one that had the information that both parties needed. So I was able to help them in that way. And there can also be, and this goes back to self-service, this doesn't have to be live training or in-person training. It could be things that are, this is how you use the archives in a video that stands on your internet, or something that, it's just in time information. It's allowing people to have like a quick video or a very quick tutorial about how this is how you use the database, or this is how you find materials. And especially if you find that you're being asked the same questions over and over again, you can find those tutorials and make those tutorials for them. So we're thinking about obviously continuous improvement. So seeking feedback to enhance accessibility, thinking about collaborative approaches between departments, between the archives and whoever you're working with. It really helps improve the archival experience, and it demonstrates the commitment to meeting needs. So the more that you work with people, the more that you'll realize, okay, this is what everyone's asking for. So let me put this collection in our database or in our internet, or let me digitize these files that everyone seems to be asking for, so you don't have to just keep on pulling those files. So you get to know what those questions are, and you can just continuously improve your workflow and the service that you provide. So it's all about really embracing service. And again, archives can be kind of a black box. People don't really understand what we do. They don't necessarily have to understand what we do, but as long as we provide service and we're there to help people within our organizations, that's a real way that we can advocate for the importance that we have within our organizations. So it contributes to a knowledge sharing environment. It streamlines information retrieval, so people aren't thinking, oh, there's so much materials I have to go through, really making sure that they can get the answers that they're looking for. And it really promotes collaboration between the archives department and all the different departments and colleagues and stakeholders you have within the organization.
Awesome. Thank you, Margot, for the wonderful presentation. And to all of our guests, we are also very excited to announce that we will soon be publishing Margot Note's next title for Lucidea Press, Preserve, Promote, Persevere, The Archivist's Guide to Internal Advocacy, the next in her series of thought-provoking and timely publications for archival professionals. And if you'd like to learn more about our archival collections management system called Archivera, please feel free to visit our website or reach out to us at sales@lucidea.com, and we'd be happy to have a chat with you. If you have more questions on any of our software or our company, our contact details are listed on the screen, and please stay tuned for more webinars and content related to this series. On behalf of the Lucidea team, I thank you all for attending, and until next time, thank you.